The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
Welcome to True Crime Stories Hub. Today we will discuss another terrible situation. A man with a golden heart was Robert Lemon, or Rob as his loved ones called him. Those who knew him well understood that despite his massive size and the tattoo of his last name on the back of his head, he was a kind giant with a big teddy bear of a heart. Robert and his wife Sabrina clicked right away when they first met. Sweet and affectionate, Sabrina immediately identified with Robert's persona. They developed a close relationship and fell in love in spite of their differences. They were devoted to their faith and went to Mass together each Sunday. Robert and Sabrina reaffirmed their devotion to one another in 2000 when they were baptized in the same church. Later, in front of their loved ones and friends, they exchanged vows in a stunning wedding in Arizona. The couple dedicated their lives to creating a stable and loving family, and they had 2 children throughout the years. In fact, Robert and Sabrina moved to Silver Lakes, California, a charming village 99 miles from Los Angeles, after deciding it was time for a change. A tranquil family community, Silver Lakes provided the ideal environment for raising their small family. While Robert worked at BNSF Railway, a job he enjoyed, Sabrina stayed at home and took care of the house and kids. Robert took pleasure in and was passionate about his work at the rail yards. He thrived in his position and truly loved what he did. His dependability and steadfast work ethic won him the admiration of his superiors. There was a lot of activity and chaos in the rail yards. Even with Robert's commitment, there were risks associated with the work. Thieves frequently visited the area, scouting the rail yards for goods to pilfer. The workers' safety was seriously threatened by these people. Robert, however, stayed watchful and never allowed these security worries to stop him from doing his work. Robert could easily defeat any opponent, human or animal, thanks to his size and intelligence. Robert was not merely a man. He was a natural force. Like his personality, Robert's personal life was full of life and energy. Like clockwork, he and his wife Sabrina were social butterflies who enjoyed arranging parties and get-togethers at their Silver Lakes house. Their amiable and hospitable demeanor drew individuals from other backgrounds into their social circle. But it was Robert and Sabrina's youthful vitality and unshakable relationship that enthralled everyone. Rather than being a long-term married couple, Robert and Sabrina were more like a couple of teens in love. They were often laughing and had cute names for one another, which inspired and uplifted everyone around them. Many of Sabrina's companions were jealous of Robert's commitment to her and his care. They hoped their husbands would be as caring and attentive as Robert. He constantly gave Sabrina support and made her feel loved and appreciated, as if he knew precisely what she needed. Despite having a wide social circle, Robert and Sabrina's connection was centered on a close-knit group of men and women who called themselves the Wolf Pack. Silver Lakes firefighter Jason Bernatine and his hairstylist wife Kelly were part of this Wolf Pack. Over the years, Robert and Sabrina established themselves as the preferred hosts of these gatherings, fostering a lively environment full of joy and laughter. For Robert and Sabrina, alcohol was a major part of their life. They adopted the maxim, "It's 5 o'clock somewhere," as their catchphrase for any time they felt the need to have a drink. Alongside the frequent drinking, their marriage's dynamics were shifting. The pair made the decision to enter into an open arrangement, enabling each other to investigate connections with other people as a result of the changes in their relationship. Their buddies Jason and Kelly were one of the couples they often hung out with. Even though their arrangement was out of the ordinary, Robert and Sabrina appeared to be happier than ever. They depicted the ideal contemporary American family. Robert started his regular 85-mile commute to work at the BNSF Railways in Tehachapi on Sunday, August 17, 2017. Robert had a scheduled shift at the BNSF warehouse, a routine industrial structure on the outskirts of the city, filling in for a colleague. As the evening wore on, Sabrina waited for Robert to come back. For the couple, this night was especially meaningful because the next day was their daughter's first day of school. The daughter of the pair insisted on kissing her father goodnight before she went to bed. But when Robert failed to come home, Sabrina became very worried. When Robert's nighttime replacement arrived at the BNSF warehouse in Tehachapi, he discovered Robert dead on the ground. In amazement, the co-worker alerted the authorities to the situation by calling 911 right away. Within minutes, officers and paramedics were on the scene, but despite their best attempts, the medics were unable to save Robert. They discovered Robert leaning against his work truck. The police examined Robert and discovered that he had been shot twice, once in the head and once in the upper body. The crime scene, a small BNSF warehouse, was promptly secured and processed by the crime scene investigators. An expended bullet discovered over Robert's head was a vital piece of evidence discovered by investigators when they carefully inspected the area. As investigators attempted to solve the enigma of this horrible crime, this bullet was gathered for evidence testing. As investigators explored the crime scene further, they discovered that the warehouse office had been looted. The floor was covered with the contents of drawers that had been emptied out. Important documents, binders, and shop manuals were strewn about as if they had been carelessly thrown aside. At first, the detectives on the scene thought Robert's murder was a crime of opportunity. The deceased had been shot dead on the ground after a suspect attempting to commit robbery had stumbled upon him. But as the inquiry went on, the investigators started to doubt their presumptions. The cops discovered that the crime scene had been fabricated after closer inspection. Robert's wife, Sabrina, learned of Robert's murder. She was in shock and despair after the dreadful news rocked her world. Sabrina withdrew to her room, cut herself off from the world, and refused to be involved in organizing his funeral. The detectives encountered an odd problem when looking into Robert's murder. Robert was a remarkable individual, according to everyone who knew him. According to Robert's friends and family, he was a man with charm, intelligence, and charisma. They said that he was the kind of man that all women desired. The detectives were perplexed by this overwhelmingly positive assessment of Robert. What would make someone want to shoot Robert in cold blood if he was such a wonderful man? The investigators were left baffled as they failed to identify any rational reason for committing such a horrible crime. The detectives were at a standstill as the investigation went on. No one was present when the incident occurred, and there was no evidence at the scene that would have identified a suspect. Sabrina, Robert's wife, was the only person they could still question. Sabrina told the investigators that she had a great relationship with her spouse. She said that she was shocked to learn that someone would wish to hurt Robert. A gunshot fragment was recovered from the crime site, however it was of no use as evidence. The investigators were able to ascertain, nevertheless, that the bullet had originated from a .44 or .45 Magnum firearm. The detectives persisted in their quest to learn the truth about Robert's murder in spite of the dearth of credible leads. The urge to bring justice to a guy who, by all accounts, deserved nothing less than the best life had driven their resolve. The security camera footage from the warehouse where Robert worked was given to the detectives so they could try to solve the mystery. They were disappointed to learn that the camera installed in his work truck was inoperable at the time of the event. Outside the warehouse was the sole camera that managed to record any video. Around the time they thought Robert was shot, the detectives saw a person with a limp moving through the warehouse complex while watching the video. Unfortunately, it was challenging to recognize any of this person's features due to the video's grainy quality. However, the contour of the person's physique gave the police confidence that it was a guy and not a woman. BNSF Railway, Robert's employer, stepped in to assist with the investigation. For any information that could result in an arrest, they offered a reward of $1,000. Numerous tipsters responded favorably to this incentive, but regrettably, none of them had anything to do with Robert's shooting. More camera evidence of Robert on the day of his murder was found by police as they dug deeper into the case. Local companies along Goodrich Drive, close to the warehouse where Robert was shot, provided this video. The detectives went over the video with great care. During that period, they were able to trace and identify every driver that came through the area. There was one noteworthy exception, though. The detectives tried their best, but they were unable to identify the motorcyclist who was passing by the scene of Robert's murder. The detectives were intrigued by this enigmatic motorcyclist. Despite their strong suspicion that the individual was involved in the crime, they were unable to identify them since their face was obscured by a helmet. The investigation was made more frustrating by the fact that the motorcyclist's identity was still unknown. The cops searched far and wide but were unable to identify the individual. The police put in a lot of effort to find the truth about the crime and Robert's friend Jason Bernstein gave them an unexpected clue. Jason came forward with crucial information that could help solve the case 3 weeks after Robert was murdered. He gave information about a man called Jonathan Hearn to the detective investigating Robert's death. Jason claims that Jonathan used to work with him as a firefighter. Jason had misgivings regarding Jonathan's connection to Sabrina Limon, Robert's wife. He told the detective that Jonathan had contacted him and apologized for Robert's death in a voicemail. The message's content, however, was confusing. Jonathan apologized for what had transpired but never directly acknowledged his role in the murder. Jason gave the police additional proof about Jonathan Hearn. Jonathan's letter, in which he apologized again for something, served as this proof. However, it was unclear from the letter exactly what Jonathan was apologizing for. Additionally, Jason's wife, Kelly, informed the police of her suspicions. She said that after murder, Jonathan had been spending a lot of time at Sabrina and Robert's house. This was odd to Kelly. Investigating Jonathan Hearn's past was the first step in the investigators' inquiry. They learned that the victim's girlfriend, Sabrina, had a part-time job at Costco in 2012. Jonathan happened to be a regular customer of this store. After striking up a conversation, Sabrina and Jonathan became friends. They immediately found themselves in a love connection after exchanging phone numbers. But Robert discovered private text messages on Sabrina's phone without realizing the affair was still going on. His faith in her was destroyed by this revelation. Robert was given the false impression that Sabrina would break up with Jonathan. The detectives found out that Jonathan Hearn had access to a motorcycle while investigating several leads. Since the cops thought the suspect had murdered Robert on a motorcycle, this revelation heightened their suspicions. After some research, it was discovered that Jonathan was the registered owner of a Yamaha motorcycle. That information gave gasoline to the detectives' theory that Jonathan Hearn may have been involved in the murder. Jonathan was a credible suspect because to the motorcycle's evidence and the fact that he had a romantic relationship with Sabrina behind Robert's back. The investigators concentrated on obtaining CCTV footage from nearby businesses in a last-ditch effort to obtain additional evidence of the suspect. When they discovered video of a motorcyclist pulling into a nearby Pilot gas station, their efforts were rewarded. More footage of the suspect was discovered by the cops in the convenience shop, where they could see him hiding his face with a red bandana. They couldn't recognize the suspect's features, though, because the helmet was still on. The detectives were stuck in a situation despite their concerns. They were unable to apprehend the motorcyclist without hard proof that he was Jonathan Hearn. The investigation came to a halt due to the absence of visual identification. The police were still certain that Sabrina was responsible for the murder, though. They were aware that Jonathan, Sabrina's lover, was probably the guilty party if their theory was right. The investigators set up a wiretap on Sabrina's phone in an attempt to capture them in the act. By listening in on any potentially damning talks between Sabrina and Jonathan, they hoped to gather the proof they required to solve Robert's murder. Sabrina and Jonathan had frequent chats, most of which focused on religion and God. There were times, nevertheless, when Jonathan recited Psalm 51, also referred to as the story of David of Bethsaida, in order to further his convictions. The detectives were intrigued by this psalm, which explores the repercussions of adultery, and pondered whether their conversation had a deeper significance. The investigators came up with a clever scheme since they were determined to persuade Sabrina and Jonathan to open up. The cops had discovered DNA evidence at the scene that connected the suspects to Robert's murder. They told Sabrina over the phone while lying. This tactic was intended to elicit a response from Sabrina and Jonathan in the hopes that it would lead them to talk about their roles in the crime. They instantly listened in on the wiretap once the detective hung up with Sabrina. Without any delay, Sabrina called Jonathan, her lover. Jonathan and Sabrina never specifically acknowledged killing Robert during the call, but the detectives thought the exchange was telling. They thought they were concealing something because neither of them appeared excited by the news of the DNA evidence. Detectives were given search warrants for several places connected to Robert's murder on November 18, 2014. In order to compile the evidence and solve the problem, these searches were essential. Detectives discovered a Yamaha motorcycle, a helmet, a red bandana, a backpack, and other materials at one of the search sites, Jonathan's house. Jonathan and Sabrina were taken into custody by the detectives that same day. After Sabrina and Jonathan were arrested, Sabrina was brought to the police station to be questioned. Sabrina vehemently denied any role in her husband's death during this 4-hour interrogation. She refused to implicate herself in any way and insisted on her innocence. Detectives searched, but they were unable to find any evidence linking Sabrina to the shooting. Because of this, the investigators had no option but to let her go. When Sabrina returned to Silver Lakes, she encountered an unanticipated reaction from her neighbors. Once appreciating her and her husband's notorious parties, the neighborhood now turned against her. After receiving threats and harassment, Sabrina was compelled to withdraw her kids from school. Sabrina decided to leave Silver Lakes because the pressure was too much to handle. Sabrina moved to Camarillo, California, in search of a new beginning. Sabrina was taken into custody on January 7, 2017, in connection with Robert's murder. This time, the charges against her were upheld, and the matter ultimately proceeded to trial. Jonathan became the prosecution's most prominent witness. According to his testimony, Sabrina had proposed to get Robert's divorce so she could be with him. Jonathan claims that after Robert made it apparent that he loved her too much and would sooner die than die, Sabrina came up with the plot to kill her spouse. Jonathan claims that Sabrina added arsenic to Robert's banana pudding with vanilla wafers during their initial attempt to kill him. Nevertheless, Robert lived, and the attempt failed. Unfazed, Jonathan and Sabrina organized a second assault. She described the plan in great detail as she showed him pictures of the warehouse and the neighborhood. Jonathan said that when he went into the warehouse to shoot Robert, Sabrina wanted him to know what to anticipate. Jonathan admitted to the jury on August 17, 2017, that he rode his motorcycle to the warehouse under Sabrina's direction. When he got there, he verified the CCTV footage showing a man walking with a limp. Jonathan acknowledged, nevertheless, that he had feigned the limp to confuse the police and deflect criticism. Jonathan challenged Robert once they were inside the facility. Following Sabrina's instructions to make the situation appear to be a robbery, he acknowledged shooting Robert. According to Jonathan, he entered the office and created a mess. Jonathan claimed to have known Robert wasn't dead before he left the warehouse. He continued to breathe. Jonathan acknowledged that he had shot Robert twice, this time in the head. Jonathan rode away from the crime scene on his motorcycle. He hastily returned home, feeling a mix of remorse and belief. When Jonathan got back, he found that Sabrina had left him a lot of missed calls. Jonathan admitted to carrying out the crime and contacted Sabrina back right away. The prosecution put Sabrina Limon to the stand as the trial went on. As the defense's main witness, Sabrina's remarks caused a lot of conjecture in the courtroom. Although Sabrina testified that she had feelings for Jonathan Hearn, she also stated that she and Robert were friendly at the time of his passing. Although Sabrina acknowledged that she was romantically involved with Jonathan, she maintained that she had no intention of leaving Robert. She asserted that she and Jonathan were still dedicated to their respective marriages and were only considering their alternatives and a future together. But according to the prosecution, Sabrina's behavior did not support her allegations. The idea that Sabrina might have killed Robert for money was one of the main tenets of the prosecution's case. They contended that Robert's life insurance proceeds might serve as the ideal incentive. Sabrina refuted the accusations, claiming that whatever money she got was put into a savings account for their kids' living costs. She asserted that she had no intention of using the funds for personal benefit. Sabrina maintained that she was unaware of his death or had anything to do with it. But the evidence the prosecution gave the jurors demonstrated that Sabrina did not behave like a distraught widow following the shooting. They displayed text exchanges between Jonathan and Sabrina that demonstrated their ongoing romance. Sabrina declares her love for Jonathan and labels him a sexy guy in one text. Sabrina went so far as to write that she wanted to kiss Jonathan constantly. 4 of the 6 charges against Sabrina Limon, first-degree murder, attempted murder, solicitation, and conspiracy to commit murder, were found guilty after a protracted trial. Sabrina was exonerated of the alleged poisoning accusation. Robert's family and friends were relieved with the guilty conviction because they had been waiting impatiently for justice. However, there were still several unresolved issues and conjectures following the poisoning charge acquittal. Jonathan Hearn was sentenced to the conditions of his plea agreement in November 2017. He received his 25-year, 4-month term after entering a guilty plea to the lesser charge of manslaughter. Jonathan apologized to Robert's family and friends and conveyed regret throughout the sentence hearing. He appeared to sincerely regret his acts and the effect they had on the lives of people concerned, even though he was participating. Sabrina was given a sentence of 25 to life plus an extra 16 months by the judge. Sabrina filed an appeal with a new lawyer despite her conviction and exhibited no remorse. Sabrina claimed in her appeal that she should never have been permitted to testify by her lawyer. She asserted that the choice made by her lawyer had undermined her defense and resulted in her conviction. Sabrina accused her lawyer of not protecting her interests and not fully preparing for the trial. State courts heard Sabrina's appeal, but in the end, her conviction was maintained. Sabrina became so frustrated that she chose to take her case to the federal court. Legal professionals and media outlets speculated on the likelihood of her acquittal as the case garnered a lot of attention. But in January 2023, a federal court upheld Sabrina's case once more. This decision crushed Sabrina's dreams.